Renaissance was a movement of great creativity in art, writing, and thought that began in the 1300s and lasted almost 300 years. Renaissance means rebirth and refers to the rediscovery of classical art and learning. The Renaissance movement began in the Italian cities of Florence, Venice, and Milan. Italian artists, such as Leonardo da Vinci, used new techniques to create great works of art. In the late 1400s, Renaissance ideas spread north through the countries of Europe. Flemish artist Jan van Eyck created highly detailed paintings of religious scenes. The Renaissance also brought scientific and technological advances. One of the most important was the printing press, invented in Germany by Johann Gutenberg. The printing press made books less expensive and helped spread new ideas faster. As books became more widely available, authors began to write in their own language rather than in Latin. One such author was Spain's Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, one of the world's most well-known novels. In the late 1500s, William Shakespeare began writing plays in London. His understanding of human nature made him one of England's most popular playwrights and one of the most famous writers of all time.
Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, a sculptor, an architect, and a scientist. He is best known as the painter of the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he also drew plans for a flying machine similar to a helicopter, over 400 years before the modern helicopter was invented. Michelangelo was a brilliant Renaissance painter and sculptor. He sculpted David and the Pietà out of huge marble blocks. He also spent 4 years painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. To paint the 10,000-square-foot ceiling, Michelangelo had to lie on his back on a scaffold 60 feet above the floor.
The age of exploration was not driven by the desire to discover new lands. It was a search for new trade routes to Asia. While the explorers did not find what they were looking for, through their daring voyages they were able to map out 2 new continents. Columbus, 1492–93. Italian navigator Christopher Columbus sailed for the Spanish. He journeyed west across the Atlantic in hopes of reaching Asia. When he landed in the Caribbean, he thought it was India and that he had found a new route to Asia. Columbus, 1493–96. Christopher Columbus launched his second journey to the Caribbean in 1493. He founded a colony in Hispaniola and explored what are today Cuba and Jamaica. Columbus, 1498–1500. During Columbus's third voyage, he was arrested and taken back to Spain in chains. Upset colonists had complained about the government Columbus set up in Hispaniola. Only his promise to find gold won him the chance to make a fourth and final voyage. Vespucci, 1499. Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian merchant and navigator, sailed with an expedition to South America. His letters about exploring the continent convinced scholars that the lands were not part of Asia, but were new continents. The Americas were later named after Vespucci. Columbus, 1502–4. On his final voyage, Columbus searched the east coast of Central America, still hoping that it was part of India. He lost half his ships and eventually had to be rescued in Jamaica.
In 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to the English East India Company that gave it a monopoly on trade with the East Indies. No other English trading company was allowed to compete with it for this trade. Mercantile trading companies at that time often made a profit by excluding any competition from a particular region. However, the company still had to face competition from trading companies from rival European powers. During the 17th century, trading companies from Portugal, England, France, Denmark, and Holland competed for trade with India. India was a valuable source of goods such as spices, cotton, silk, and precious stones and metals. Trading companies established trading centers along the Indian coastline called factories. These trading centers were called factories because the trading company officials were called factors. Over time, the intense competition between trading companies began to reduce the profits they were making. In order to increase their profits, they needed to eliminate the competition. The companies began to develop armies and to use force to eliminate their competitors. Over time, the Dutch, Portuguese, and Danish trading companies were driven out of trade in India, leaving France and England as the two main rival powers. The struggle between the French East India Company and the English East India Company was played out through three Anglo-French wars fought from 1744 to 1763. These were also called the Carnatic Wars because most of the battles were fought in the Carnatic and in other parts of Tamil Nadu. At the conclusion of the Carnatic Wars, the English East India Company emerged as the dominant trading company in India, and the French ceased to be a threat to their activities.